So right on cue, someone is outside mowing the yard, making all sorts of noise again, but we'll try to work around it. So you have an exam coming up on Friday. I set up a sample exam this morning that you can go in, try out. It's only got 3 or 4 questions, but it's just to give you an idea of how quizzes work. It's called quizzes on Canvas in case you haven't taken a test there before. Have any of you had a chance to go in there yet? No pressure if you haven't. Okay, just take some time in there, see how it feels. If you have any questions about it, let me know. Or if you have any questions about the exam, also let me know. If you want to meet for office hours, please give me a 24-hour notice before we do. So if you want to meet for office hours tomorrow, for example, at 3 o'clock, let me know by 3 o'clock today that you want to do that, just so I can make sure I've got everybody on the schedule. Good. Any questions about the exam now that we're sitting here talking with one another?
Is it during the class time or is it like?
It'll be during the class time for those of you who are doing the class synchronously. For the asynchronous people, they have another designated time when they'll be doing it. And the duration is the same. It's an hour and a half, although our classes are about an hour, hour and 15. It's an hour and a half unless I've already received accommodation information. And then we've already spoken about how long that exam will be in that case. So the thing to remember is that Canvas has like an auto grader, and it's going to go through and auto grade the multiple choice. So when you see your exam grade at the end of the exam, it's only taking into account that those multiple choice questions. It hasn't factored in your essay. And the other thing to remember is that I will go back and manually grade every question, including the ones that have been auto-graded. Sometimes there's a mistake in the way I've set up the exam. Sometimes the grading is erratic. And so if that's happened, don't worry, I will go and oversee all of them. So, and if you have any questions at the end of it and you feel like, you know, I did X and it recorded Y or whatever, just let me know. I'm happy to work with you on that. Good. So this exam this feels very funny in that we've only really had class a few times and now suddenly you've got a test. So just take this, although it does count toward your grade, just take it as a practice run. You have lots of opportunities to change your grade over the rest of the course. And the benefit of it being so soon is that you don't have that much material that you need to cover. So just a reminder that I will not quiz you or give you an exam question that says name this building. I won't do that. So you don't need to memorize names. I'm not going to ask you dates either. Sometimes you have to know like a general region of the world, but I'm not going to say like, is this building in Athens, Rome, or Venice? I'm not interested in those tiny specifics. I want you to come away from the course with an understanding of how architecture works, what it says, what it does in the world. And so it's not a memorization situation, I guess, is what I want to say. Good. Any other questions on content or things like that?
Is the essay going to be like a formal analysis?
No, that's a good question. So I will give you 3 options for the essay. And generally it will be something like, what are the, I guess it's not a formal analysis, but I will say like, what are 10 interesting facts about this building from this time and this place in front of you. I'll give you the name, the dates, and all that. And then you just want to go through and you want to give me 10 points of content, and they need to be individuated points of content. So example, if you say this building has a Greek temple on its front porch or as its front porch, if you later sort of say, and also it has a Greco-Roman style front porch, it'll only count once, that bit of information. Good. And you can almost go through, I've had lots of people go through and just, you know, make check marks for themselves to know that they had 10 points of content. And that's for an A+, and then, you know, you just kind of go down there, go down the list from there. Good. What's another question?
So will we have a picture to go along with the essay, or is it like something we should know?
Nope, you'll have lots of pictures throughout the exam. Most of the time I'm having you look at a thing and tell me something about it. You'll need to brought some knowledge with you to do that, but I'll have the images there. And if I don't have the images there, then it's not an image-based question. The one exception to, you'll have multiple choice, you'll have true, false, and then you'll have a point that's like fill in the blank. I think I called it matching in the instructions, but it's not matching. So just to be clear, I'm going to give you a diagram, one that we've looked at in class, and then you'll need to say, this part is called a capital. This part is called a column. This is, you'll need to identify things like that, and you'll have to come forward with those terms. They won't be written down. But you've seen the point, you've seen the times in the class where I've done that. It's where I've said, okay, you'll need to know these things. And it's just a couple of different times. So it's not a wide range of things you'll need to know about for that kind of match or that kind of identification. Any other questions?
Will we need to meet on Zoom while taking the exam, or
No.
is it just like available at 1?
It'll be available at 1. It'll start at 1. I think that you guys get an announcement, but because I'm not sure of that, I usually post the exam, send an announcement, and say the exam's ready. So you'll get it one way or another. You'll know that it's up, but just also be sitting at your computer at 1 o'clock and it will come on. Yeah, good question. Anything else? Okay. We have a couple of TED Talks today. Who would like to start?
I can start.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rosie. So what I'm going to do, and you'll see this for all of you who are going to do it going forward, I'm going to now hand over the hosting. You're now going to be the host of this conversation. And that means you can share your screen.
Okay. One second. Okay, can everyone see it?
Yeah.
Okay, and like, sorry if my Wi-Fi cuts out or anything. It's like thundering outside and my power's out. It's like we have a generator on the first floor, so
Wow.
and the weather's crazy here.
Okay, hopefully it'll hold up.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, so when I was a freshman in high school, I traveled to Italy, and it was my first time ever going to Europe and my first time out of the country. I was nervous and excited, not really knowing what to expect. And one of the first sites that I visited was the Colosseum while there. And immediately my anxieties completely faded when I approached the building. And as I looked up at the ancient Roman architecture and elliptical structure that allowed for visibility in every seat, I was in awe. And it felt surreal. So I learned about the history of the building in school, yet here I was standing in front of the massive building, standing in the exact spots as the ancient Romans. So here is a map of Rome during the Roman Empire. So the Colosseum was also called the Flavian Amphitheater, which was located in Rome. And it was east of Palatine Hill and located on a low-lying area on top of the drained artificial lake and gardens of Emperor Nero's Golden Palace. Okay. So a bit about the history of the building includes that in 70 AD, after Emperor Nero died, Emperor Vespasian took the throne of the Flavian dynasty and commissioned the construction of the Colosseum. So he had Emperor Nero's artificial lake drained and decided to put the Colosseum directly on top of that. So I thought that maybe this decision could be symbolic of his power and reign over Nero now that he was the new emperor. Then anyways, Vespasian had the Colosseum constructed as a gift to the Roman people and also to restore power and stability of the empire. And after Vespasian's death, his son Titus opened the Colosseum in 80 AD, and Titus held a 100-day festival of games to celebrate its opening. Okay, so now you may be wondering what exactly is the purpose of this building if you don't already know. So essentially, its arena was a place where gladiators fought other gladiators and animals until death. So I personally think this is pretty gruesome, but the Romans enjoyed to watch it. And there were also wild animal fights here, executions, and sea warfare in which the Colosseum was filled with water and men fought mock wars. So these all provided the Roman spectators in the crowd with entertainment, and it was a huge part of their culture. And another use of this building besides solely entertainment could be establishing power and dominance of the Roman Empire by its massive structure. And while I was there, upon visiting the Colosseum, I always thought it remained a place of significance all throughout the entirety of history. But I now realize I was wrong, because little did I know that it was only used for 4 centuries before the weakening of the Roman Empire and public shift away from supporting the gladiatorial combat. And other factors that influenced the decline usage of the building included natural disasters and lightning. And something that really surprised me was that for centuries the building was abandoned and a place for vandals and robbers. Then in the 18th century, something else that I didn't know prior was that popes conserved the building as a sacred site. And in the 20th century, 2/3 of the Colosseum was destroyed due to natural disasters. Okay, so now that we are all done with the history, let's take a look at the plan of the building, which depicts the ground floor level. So when I visited the Colosseum in 9th grade, I did not know all the measurements or details of the plan, including that the building was 189 meters long and 156 meters wide. I also didn't know that it included 4 stories with 48 meters high, and that the bottom 3 levels each had 80 arches, while the 4th level had small windows, or even that the Colosseum could fit as many as 50,000 people. Okay, now the elevation slide. So you might be wondering, what is the Colosseum made out of? This photo of the Colosseum's elevation, which is the front of the building and your eye level view of the building, it shows that the building is mostly made of stone and concrete. So the main framework and facade are made of around 100,000 cubic meters of travertine limestone, which is a rock made of calcite. And this limestone is held together by iron clamps. So then the secondary walls are made of volcanic rock tufa, which was used using cement in the inner walls for a lightweight structure. The inner and arcade vaults are mostly made of concrete. There are even bricks in the inner walls and arches. And lastly, in regard to materials, there were beautiful tiles and marble used to decorate the floors and the walls, and there were even marble seats in the amphitheater. And here's a photo of the section of the Colosseum where you can see a slice of the inside. So in my opinion, one of the most beautiful architectural aspects of the Colosseum are the columns. So there are 3 types of columns in classical orders present on the Colosseum, which we read about for homework today also. And the first is the Doric order. It's the simplest form and has no decorative foot. And it's found on the first floor, so the bottom circle on the diagram. Then the second order is the Ionic column. It is more detailed than the Doric order. It has a decorative foot and like a scroll-like shape on the capital. And that's on the second floor, so the middle circle on the diagram. And then the last column on the Colosseum is the Corinthian column, and it's the most complex and detailed of the 3. And it has a decorative foot and has a detailed acanthus leaves on its capital, and it's located on the 3rd floor of the Colosseum, so the top on the picture here. Okay, so while I stood at the Colosseum, I was also amazed by the arches and vaults. There are 2 main types that I saw at the Colosseum. These were the barrel vault and the groin vaults. So the barrel vault pretty much extends in a straight line and has a curved ceiling over 2 parallel walls. And then the groin vault is when 2 barrel walls intersect at right angles. So upon reflecting, I believe that some of the benefits of these arches could allow light into the building and also allow for adequate circulation. And the open air coming through kind of gave it a more welcoming feel for the public to kind of enter in. However, the strong concrete can also represent the strength of the Roman Empire, considering that it's a lot of it lasted until today. And these arches also allowed for construction of like such a massive building in such a short period of time back then, and also it could hold very enormous loads. Something else that I learned while researching that I found to be really interesting was that there used to be awnings present on the Colosseum. So another word for awnings can be vela or velarium, which means sails in Latin. And pretty much these were retractable overhangs similar to awnings. and they were made of canvas and covered around 2/3 of the structure. And it required thousands of sailors to control these overhangs. I believe there were as many as 240 holes that supported wooden beams, which in turn supported these awnings. And the main purpose was to protect the spectators from sun and rain, so all the weather while they were watching. Something peculiar that stood out to me when I was at the Coliseum was a strange looking substructure at the foot where the arena used to stand. And I remember I had no clue what it was when I was there. I was wondering about that. But now through my research, I know that there was a wooden floor of the arena that was covered with sand to soak in the blood from the gruesome fights. And then underneath that wooden floor was a strange structure that I originally didn't know. And I now know that it's called a hypogeum. And essentially it consists of corridors, animal cages, and an elevator-like system with pulleys, levers, hinges, all underneath the arena. And it also had a complex network system of drainage and sewer systems. And in my opinion, the hypogeum was one of the coolest parts of the Colosseum because you could really see the technological advancements and strong engineering skills that the Romans had with the elevator-like system and the drainage and sewer systems. And it's really amazing to think that these Romans back in 70 to 80 AD were so intelligent to carefully plan and engineer the design of the building with all these advanced features. Then on to social classes. So another tie to past culture in the empire includes social classes and discrimination. So only the elite were allowed to sit up front of the Colosseum to watch, and the lower classes, the women and the slaves, had to sit up on higher levels, which emphasized the discrimination present then. And also the Colosseum served as a symbol of power, and the bloody activities that occurred in this building could have instilled fear and obedience in the Roman citizens themselves. Okay, so now for ties to modern culture. In terms of tying this into architecture to present culture that many of you are familiar with, I noticed how similar the Colosseum was to modern day sports stadiums such as football stadiums. So they both have the same elliptical architectural style where everyone has a view of the stadium no matter where their seat is. And the design of the structure, I think, definitely was influenced by the Colosseum. And then another tie to modern culture is the Vancouver Library in British Columbia. So pretty much you can see how similar they look. At first glance, you might even think they're the same building, but they're not, obviously. But you can see the similar colors, shapes, columns, everything seems pretty similar with the open spaces too on the top level here. Okay. And then lastly, the Colosseum is one of the main tourist attractions worldwide. People continue to visit it each and every year. I visited it, and maybe some of you have as well. And as I looked up at the Colosseum on my visit, I realized the massive building really emphasizes the power of the Roman Empire, and the beautiful design of the building represents the Roman strong engineering skills, organization, and careful planning. Right, thank you.
Excellent, Rosie. That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Questions, comments, observations? Good. Just moving forward. Try to come up with 1 or 2 questions for your colleagues just so we can keep this discussive. I really appreciated how you moved from the history to the architecture to the social implications. That was really nicely done, and then tied it to the present. One of the things, that you mentioned that carries over is, of course, that that view of the performance, the action, the sports, the brutality that's happening on the ground floor of the Coliseum carries over into modern stadiums. Another thing that carries over, however, is that distinction between social classes. It's not written out as such. It's not as if people from different classes couldn't move around the stadium, but of course, the cheap seats are higher up and the more expensive seats are closer in. So these are some of the ways that we've carried forward these holdovers from the ancient world into the present. So just one more detail. You covered so much, Rosie, that there's really nothing left for me to say on it, which is fantastic. But another interesting detail, They saved some of the engineering from Nero's lake or pond that was there, and the Colosseum could be filled with water if they wanted to have boat fights. People could go out on their small boats and fight from a boat against one another. Just a crazy thing that we don't see that today often, where you can transition from a sports floor to aquatics all in one move. So again, it just speaks to the engineering skills. Great. Very well done, Rosie. Thank you. Okay, now if you will, let's see. Christina, are you ready to go? Okay.
Yep.
Rosie, will you go to the list of participants that you can see at the bottom of the screen and find Christina's name and make her the host of this, please?
Okay. Let's see. Not the best with this. Okay.
Oh, no, it's totally fine. You can also just hand it back to me if that's easier, but you'll have to
Okay.
hit participants, find the name, and then there are like 3 little dots to the right of the name, and there it says you can choose make host.
Okay. Participants. A make host. Okay. Christina, right?
Perfect.
Okay. Change host. I think that should have worked. Did you get it?
I can see that you enabled her as the host. That's great. So Christina, now you should be able to hit share screen
Yep.
at the very bottom.
Can you guys see my screen?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Cool. Awesome. Just gonna move you guys out of the way. Okay. So today I will be talking about construction and destruction of the caves of the Thousand Buddhas, or the Mogao Caves in China. So first I want you guys to imagine a World Heritage Site where a mile-long stretch of granite cliff is the home to almost 500 caves with almost 50,000 square meters of painted walls, ceilings, elaborate sculptures, silk and cloth with depictions of ancient times, as well as other manuscripts and scrolls. The location which I'm describing is the Mogao Caves in Dunhuang, China. My pronunciation on some of these words might be a little rough, so I apologize, but I'll do my best. This architectural masterpiece, as seen in these photos, is the world's largest collection of Buddhist archives. As I mentioned, it's located in Dunhuang. As you can see on the map, Dunhuang is located in the Gansu province in northwest China, and it has kind of a weird border, which is because of the topography surrounding this province. So to the north, you have the Gobi Desert of Mongolia, and to the south, you have the high mountains and plateau. And this is all going to become important when we start talking about the trade and commerce that occurred here. So this architectural site is an incredible documentation of over 1,000 years of changing cultures, languages, religions, and also a wonderful example of the importance of historical preservation. And I'm going to be looking at it particularly through the lens of construction and destruction, which is kind of similar to the ideas we've been talking about in class of excavating rock from caves and removing that to build the pyramids. But first, I'll give you a little history of Dunhuang. So as you may know, Confucianism was the ancient Chinese philosophical and ethical teachings founded by Confucius, which basically say that everyone is an important part of the community, and as long as everyone works together and does their given job, the community will prosper. And because of modern day Dunhuang's location in the oasis in the middle of the desert, the people that lived here in ancient times had plenty of resources and water, as we've learned about throughout this class, to survive and prosper for many years on their own without much help from the outside world. So this idea worked for a really long time until it was challenged in the 2nd century when individuals began to go out into the West and try to find other resources or things that they could use for trade, which was the start of the Silk Road. Dunhuang is the area that we're focusing on today, it happens to be the last chain in the Chinese part of the Silk Road. So it's this huge clashing spot of the two hemispheres of the West and China coming together, and allows for a huge sharing of different ideas, cultures, religions, artistic styles, as well as resources. So I'd love to talk about all the different battles and turning over of religions that occurred, but for time's sake, just know that there were many centuries of fighting before the rise in Buddhist occurred. So many of the artifacts in these caves represent Buddhas in different positions relating to the time period that they were made in. So here you can see one of those from one of the Mogao caves. And then in 366 CE, there's a story of a Buddhist monk named Yuezhen who has a vision. And in this vision, he sees a thousand Buddhists drenched in gold light emanating from the top of this cliff. And so the monk goes up to the cliff in the story and digs the first cave in hopes that other people will follow after him and continue digging the caves, hence the nickname, the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas. And as you can see on the right-hand side, this is a depiction of some of these Buddhas from one of the caves that was later built. So in Buddhism, merit making is very important because they have strong belief in the afterlife. So if you do good deeds in your present life, you'll die and you'll live a prosperous afterlife. And it just so happens that the commissioning of cave building was a great merit-making deed. So over centuries, rich emperors and groups of people that could come together and pool their money commissioned caves to be built. And over the centuries, the monks would dig and pray and paint and decorate these caves with stone carvings and murals. And the sheer number of the caves that still exist, I think it's 492 to be exact, is really telling of the importance of merit making in the Buddhist culture and also the importance of these cave commissions. So the city changes hands over many centuries, but it remains a vibrant hub of exchange on the Silk Road until around the 11th century when its role starts to decline. So fast forward to 1900, when Wang Yuanlu, a Taoist monk who's depicted here on the left-hand side, discovers the library cave, which is cave number 17, which had been sealed off for hundreds of years, but stored 50,000 manuscripts, documents, scrolls, all from different languages of different religions, depicting different science ideas, etc. And so Wang appoints himself guardian of the cave temples. However, he's not the best guardian because only 7 years later, Mark Aurel Stein, the first explorer, comes to Douai and pays Wang to take some of the manuscripts back to his home country and to spread that knowledge and to continue transcribing those into more and more copies so that more people can read about the cultural shifts from this time. After that, in 1908, French explorer Paul Pellier, who's depicted actually in the library cave on the right-hand side here, which is really cool. You can see all the scripts and scrolls and things with him crouching down there. Does another expedition to the area and again does the same thing, pays for almost 10,000 manuscripts, which he takes back to France with him. And this becomes kind of a trend. Many archaeologists and explorers from all over the world come in, pay or not for their portion of the archives and take them back to their country, which kind of poses the question of the spread of ideas and how important spreading knowledge is across the world. But I also have some bit of a problem with taking ancient artifacts out of their host country and removing them and bringing them to other locations. And you guys may too, maybe we can talk about that after. But eventually the remaining 1/5 of these documents were taken to Beijing, where they still are to this day. So that's good, at least some of them were kept. So as you can see, the caves are an amazing documentation and glimpse into the daily lives of the people that lived here, and of the cultural and religious shifts that occurred over these 1,000 years. And analysis of each of the documented works from the caves show different time periods having different cultural influences. So the picture on the left is shown from an early cave, which is said to have most Indian and Western influences, while the picture of the painting on the right is from one of the middle caves, which is said to have mostly Chinese influences. The later caves have this mismatch of many different influences and backgrounds. And I'm sure to the trained eye, these differences are clear. However, for me, it's hard to tell what those are specifically. Okay, so the Mogao caves today, as you can see on the left, this is the caves from the entrance. You can go visit it. You can go on a tour and go into some of the caves. And then, as you can see on this picture on the right, it's a team of restorators working on one of the caves, which is important because there are currently many threats to the structure of this architectural site. From the outside, there are natural elements such as sandstorms and rainwater that are slowly eroding the granite cliffs that the caves are dug out of. And then from the inside, there are up to 6,000 tourists per day that go into these caves, and there are documented high levels of carbon dioxide and humidity and temperature changes that are slowly eroding away the paint and the sculptures that are inside the caves. So this also poses another question about the balance between the revenue, the income coming from the tourism, as well as the spread of knowledge that happens when you allow people to come visit this architectural site, and then that balance with restoring and preserving this important historical site to the best of their ability. So kind of where is that line drawn? So the last thing I want to leave you guys with are a few questions, which I know there are a lot, but I thought these were interesting as I was doing my research. How does this architecture embody aspects of art, science, religion, and construction? Who owns history? Should ancient artifacts be spread all over the world or kept in the country of origin? What is the importance of preserving history? And what about the significance of identifiable cultural, religious, and artistic shifts and trends? Thank you.
Great questions. Well done. Let's think a little bit about who owns history, because that really comes out in a strong way in your presentation. Any thoughts on that? What do you think about this situation in particular? Meredith?
So I do think it's really interesting that you pointed out about people taking the scrolls and taking them back to their own countries, and then posing a question of, wow, that was able to spread information about where these scrolls are coming from and the people that were from there to other places in the world, especially during a time where like you couldn't just look something up and learn all this information. Right. It also, like you just said, like took away from the place and like history in itself. So now it's just like I'm like conflicted in my mind about like how I should feel about it, because it's like such a hard question, because while at the same time it's like people are learning from it, it's like how much is like learning worth to like take away from something else, I guess.
Yeah, great thoughts on that. And I think another question to add into that is who is learning, right? Because as they move from one region to another, different people have exposure or not. Other thoughts or feedback on that? Yeah, Matthew.
Yeah, I actually took an ethics class last semester when I was studying abroad in London, and wrote a paper on like the repatriation of art that was like taken in like by imperial powers. And one of the ones that I looked at was mentioned in one of the videos in the Elgin marbles, and like kind of how they're pretty much stolen from Greece, and how Greece has spent like the last 70 years trying to get them back. I definitely think it raised a lot of interesting questions for me. Kind of Meredith touched on it similarly, is like, what's the value of learning? And I feel like now in this technological age, it definitely seems like it would be so much easier to be able to preserve and keep all those items, you know, kind of in their natural place and location, and then just be able to digitize as much as you can. And so you can like observe and learn like digitally. And not everyone, of course, has access like we do, you know, to have online class and stuff like that. But I think that protects, you know, a lot of these, you know, these ancient spaces that we would love to learn more about, but like also want to preserve for future generations.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it could be the function of some of the international bodies that we have, you know, that are focused on art and architectural preservation. Maybe the digitization resources might come from that. group pool if an individual country, for example, doesn't have the budget to fund those individual projects. It's a possibility. Good. Any other thoughts? Okay, Ellen and then Sophie.
I thought it was really interesting how, like, we've been talking about how the artifacts were taken away. I was kind of wondering, were they ever given back, or are they somewhere present day, or have they been lost? Like, is that just a piece of history that's been lost because it was taken?
That's a really great question, and I think it varies from site to site. For example, with the example that Matthew gave us, there has been a whole new contemporary museum built to house these pieces that Greece is hoping to have returned to them. They exist somewhere else in another foreign museum and gallery, and it's hotly contested who should own those pieces. On the one hand, say these foreign museums have paid a lot of money. It is a main part of their collection to have them housed where they are. And then we can also see the rights of the Greeks, in this case, to their own heritage and the importance of getting those back to where they are. So it does vary quite a bit. That's not a very pointed answer, but case to case, you'll see all the examples. Good. Bea, did you have a point on this one? Otherwise, I'll shift to Sophie and then come to you.
Yeah, I thought that the third question was really interesting. Like, what is the importance of preserving history? Because I was thinking about the fact that in our society nowadays, all of our values, beliefs, and knowledge are based upon what we have been taught about history. Like, everything that we have been taught is what people made and created in the past. So I think it's really interesting and important to preserve history.
Yeah, absolutely. Sophie, you had a point earlier on. Sophie, were you able to hear me on that? Did you have a point earlier on?
Oh, yes, sorry, my computer was frozen. I think one way that we're seeing now a lot of what museums are doing to try and combine making sure these artifacts stay with their country of origin, but also the spread of knowledge is kind of rotating exhibits. And so I think that's something that's really important, because the country of origin still maintains the ownerships of those artifacts, but by having these rotating exhibits and having them go all over the world, it kind of allows us to be able to go see these things and perhaps maybe motivate us to go to that country of origin and like see where it's actually coming from. And I think that that's something that would be great for prevalence in museums and have more exposure for these like traveling exhibits.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really important way of circulating bodies of knowledge, bodies of works. It's a really great point. Just one more. Yeah, Faifan.
Sorry. And I visited the Mogul Cave when I was in junior high school, and according to the tour guide at that time, she told us that most of the broken pieces or the lost pieces are robbed by Chinese people, because and during the Cultural Revolution, in 1840s or 1940, I forgot, but during that time, so it's kind of hard to restore it because most of the pieces are lost or just destroyed by people.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm so glad that you were able to see the caves in person. That's fantastic. But it is true that a lot of looting comes from within the countries themselves. And the Cultural Revolution is a great point. This was a shift in political orientation, right? Where a group, largely Marxist influence, trying to aim toward a less hierarchical, less religious mode of government, decided to eradicate all of the cultural heritage, or tried to eradicate a lot of the cultural heritage connected to this. And we've seen this around the globe. This happened in China, but it happened all throughout Europe. It's happened really in almost I think every continent without exception. So it's true that sometimes it happens from within, and without the historical lens to say, wait, okay, we get the political point, or we disagree, or we agree with your political point, but just save the art. Can we see it apart from its origins? And sometimes it's tricky. Sometimes it's not possible for people, and sometimes it's extremely important that we do. We'll see a few examples of how during the Iraq War, the United States really hammered down on the regions of the Middle East in ways that damaged their cultural heritage irreparably. And we also see in Syria the way that looting from the inside is also causing very similar losses of culture. Yeah. Good. One more little point, and then we'll move on. What's the difference between preserving history and preserving visual artifacts? Is there any difference? I guess does one offer something different than another? Yeah, Matthew. Oh, wait, sorry, you're muted.
I think preserving history and artifacts is slightly different, because I think history typically provides a little bit more of a broader context. Like you can have like a single artifact, in a museum, and like without context, you're not really going to understand it. But if you're preserving history and you're like leaving it in its like original location, you have the context of the region, you have the context of the people, and I think it provides more learning than just like a single artifact.
Totally valid point. Yes, good. Anybody else? Yeah, Lucas.
Yeah, I mean, preserving history could also be the methods used to even construct the artifacts in the first place. Like we can preserve the pyramids, but it's still kind of debated how they even were able to build them in the first place.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we were able to preserve that methodology, it might be useful even today.
Yeah, great, good. And then I want to push it the other direction. One thing that visual culture offers us that textual history doesn't are verifications, on a biological level. Sometimes you can do carbon dating to figure out exactly how old a thing is, exactly when some cultural events took place. We learn a lot by just seeing how people lived. We see a lot about their culture that's not written down by their visual representations. Some of the things are just implied, and they would have been known amongst the culture who was speaking or reading from those texts, but without really seeing them, sometimes there's a whole new level of understanding that comes from those. So I want to argue for the fact that they are important to one another. Okay, good. Excellent. Great questions, Christina. Well done. Thank you very much. If you will hand the hosting back to me, please. Do we have anyone else presenting today? Okay. All right, then. Oops.
Can I give it back to you? Sorry.
No, it's fine. So you go to the participants, like at the bottom of your screen, there should be a little thing that says participants, and it should be like tiny number 13 by it, probably.
Oh, gotcha.
Click on that and then find my name, and then there'll be 3 little dots, and just click make host.
Okay.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Bear with me a second. Okay. Today we're moving into one of my favorite sections of the class, and you're going to hear me say this about 10 times, but truly, I really love this section. We're looking at Chthonic architecture. We spent a little bit of time, I think, doing some readings around this idea of Chthonic architecture, but it is a very new field, bizarrely, because the things it studies are very, very old. But it's a whole new way of understanding architecture, and one that really needs more and more investigation. So, let's see. I have to reorient myself here to get the right screen. Today, we're going to continue with our study of the axial plan. We are looking at cliffs and caves, And the architecture that we will run through in the remaining part of the class is Queen Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, Abu Simbel, and very briefly the Ajanta caves in India. So we began the class with this question of what is architecture? And the main answers for this generally are describing buildings that are self-supporting, that stand up from the earth, or what we would call tectonic structures. And as we heard from that first video, you were reading architecture as the will of an epoch translated into space. Generally, that has kind of a generative quality to it. Like if you were to go out and build sandcastles on the beach, you're creating this embodiment of the will of the epoch through real architectural form. We looked at all the different things this means. You know, you are a poet in the morning, you're a humanist shortly after that, and then you're a builder. We wanted to add a community organizer to that, to think about just everything involved in creating representative buildings. We're going to skip over architecture history. But what we want to think about when we think about architectural history is that it's an analysis of architectural aesthetics. What is your general definition of aesthetics? If you think about what aesthetics are, what generally comes to mind? Or what's the first easy answer to that? Yeah, Gabby.
Something that's pleasing towards the eye.
Yeah, exactly. We generally think about like beauty as part of aesthetics, or how things look are pleasing. Yeah, exactly. Generally, it's something that is a descriptor on top of the item, right? You might have, or the object, or the person, place, or thing. It's not its essence. We think about it as a layer on top. But I definitely want to trouble that way of seeing. To say that aesthetics, the way we want to think through it in the course, aesthetics are the ways that ideas take shape in the world. In other words, we could say that aesthetics make culture and history visible. It sounds like aesthetics is a decorative layer on top of an already existing framework, but the argument here is that aesthetics is the very act of something appearing itself, of showing up at all, or being in any way. Questions on that? All right, so let's get to the aesthetics of Chthonic architecture. So many people have known about these fantastic examples of Chthonic architecture throughout time and place, such as the ancient city of Petra that we're looking at here. We've seen iconic images. They show up more and more on social media because they're so spectacular. But these cultural manifestations of architecture are still in so many ways mysterious. Rather than being built up from the ground, they've been carved or they've been hewn from the rock. They're an extractive mode of architecture rather than a constructive one. Most of the time, the projects are left in situ, meaning like they are in place. They are dug into an already existing place or carved out of one. And most architectural historians will tend to dismiss Chthonic architecture as architecture at all. It's been looked at as sculpture or as a standalone art object rather than architecture. You're seeing in this image one of the reasons that people do think about it as sculptural. Here we are looking at a series of carvings of a pharaoh that create the facade of Abu Simbel, which we'll look at in more detail in a minute. But it's not only those carvings on the outside that make the building. There is a whole inner structure that is deeply tied to those carvings on the outside, in the same way that Greek temples are deeply tied to the columns and the tympanum and all of the different structures that are embedded within that given form of architecture. So I'm arguing along with others, particularly the scholars who really have spent their whole lives on chthonic architecture, that chthonic architecture really should be understood as architecture. And by architecture, in this case, we mean this powerful lens of understanding that fuses human behavior, technology, culture, spirituality, engineering, materials. There's nothing really different in these forms in that sense. So the thing with chthonic architecture is you just can't help but ask what in the world caused people to carve out the native ground to make their structures. And then we want to ask what relationship do these types of structures have with freestanding works of architecture? And what contributions do these works make to our understanding of history, culture, technology, materiality, and the spirituality of the constituents? So what we're really playing off here is chthonic architecture on the left, tectonic architecture on the right, freestanding architecture, the type that we looked at in post and lintel construction, for example. That's all tectonic architecture. And you could look at the Latin origins of the word tectonic, and it really means something like techne or technology. It's an act of building. We saw it in arches, we saw it in the post and lintel, all these ways of building up higher and higher and higher. We saw it from this funny little demo. The way that tectonic architecture has been framed is as a constructive craft. It is an assembly, it's an elevated assembly. And all of this gets tied into an enlightenment vision of self-empowerment or self-realization. You know, you're going out and you're building your own home, or you're designing your own farm shed, or you're all the different ways that we are making something visible. And tectonic architecture heavily relies on the strength of the materials, and it celebrates construction and assembly, because those are the things that make tectonic architecture possible. Things can't stand up if they aren't well designed or well engineered. Chthonic architecture, on the other hand, has a very different set of meanings, backgrounds, and associations. One, it is integrated into an already existent earthly mass. It's something that enters into the infinite, frightening body of the earth itself, right? If you think about a cave, if you think about wandering into a cave, there's the excitement, there's the adventure, but there's always that little bit of fear. You don't know what's in there. Chthonic architecture is associated with an act of burrowing or tunneling, and it's made by subtraction and often relies on different layers of concealment. Questions on that? Okay. The materials for chthonic architecture are igneous rock. Is anybody a geologist? Anyone studying geology? Okay. So igneous rock, which is pushed up through the crust of the earth as a blob of cooling magma, and it generally creates a large surface of stone. Another form is sedimentary rock, which is deposited on riverbeds or in ocean deposits. And then it's compressed and compacted over time. And it creates these striations of different density. Finally, metamorphic rock, which is stone that has been heavily heat treated. Under immense amounts of heat and pressure, it becomes extremely hard, and it generally has a different mineral composition than any of the two former types that we just talked about. This is the global scope of chthonic architecture. It really exists right around the middle band of the earth, right around the equator. We're going to focus on our first case study, which is in Egypt, right here in the Nile Valley, in fact. And the two case studies we're looking at today come from the Middle Kingdom in Egypt, as well as the New Kingdom. And those are really defined by their architectural structures. The Old Kingdom was when mastabas were the predominant form of architecture, and then emerged into the geometric pyramids that we looked at last week, maybe already. In the Middle Kingdom, these pyramids are replaced by complexes which engage the hills, or with Chthonic architecture. And then in the New Kingdom, these Chthonic structures become even more cave-like. It's just a shift from above ground to more and more underground. Okay, we're gonna look at the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut. Anyone want to tell me a little bit about Hatshepsut? Yeah, Lucas.
She was a female pharaoh, which was pretty strange at the time. I believe it was somebody died, and then the next person that was supposed to become the pharaoh was too young, so she like took control during that time.
Right.
And then she was like way better at like controlling the army and trade than any of the other previous pharaohs, and then crowned herself pharaoh.
Yeah.
And then the reason like her temple was kind of ruined was because the guy after that was supposed to succeed her didn't want other people to like know that there was a strong female pharaoh, so he kind of like took over all of her stuff and like put his name on it.
Yeah, exactly. It's this wild and crazy story of exactly what you've just explained, Lucas. A woman who comes into power sort of incidentally. She struggles, of course, in this. I mean, have you ever heard of a female pharaoh? No. Unless you're an Egyptologist, and there were a few after her. It's just wildly uncommon. And she restructured so many things about Egyptian life at the time. She was excellent at trade. She opened up tradeways that had been closed off for a couple hundred years prior. She had great ambitions when it came to infrastructure, and we'll just see one example of that. And she was able, although there was an incredible amount of resistance in the beginning, she was really able to take control of the Egyptian people in a way that undercut the ideas that, of course, women couldn't do that. She does part of that through her own iconography, which is fascinating. Hopefully we'll have some time to get into that. So as we saw with the pyramids, most of the stone being used for the pyramids is coming from the Aswan quarries. And during Hatshepsut's reign, these quarries started to dry up, or they just started to be, they were overused to the point where there were not a lot of resources left to dig out or to carve out for pyramids. I love this image because you can see just where an obelisk was cut out in this middle central part of the image. Here's another image of those quarries. It looks very ample, but for the building projects, as we saw with the pyramids, I mean, it takes an incredible amount of stone and the right type of stone. And it just wasn't plentiful enough to create these historic pyramids that we saw before. So when we think about the shift to Chthonic architecture, one thing that's important is to see the predecessors of this way of building into the ground. And we see those as earlier as Dozer's burial chambers, which you see right here. This is, we're looking at an underground image. This bit up here is dirt. We're not even up above ground level yet. These are all below ground subterranean chambers. So the idea of the Chthonic was already present in these early tectonic pyramids. It was kind of a duplicity of the two together, or duet. Okay, what are we looking at here? What sort of architectural tool is this?
Is it a plan?
Yeah, it's a plan. Excellent. Any more details about this plan?
It appears to have lots of columns.
Yeah, excellent. Right, we see those in those little circles. Good. What else?
It looks like there's like a center, maybe like hallway, or like,
yeah,
kind of like a road. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. We have the center line from the lower court up through all the way to this back bit. So knowing that when you design along a central line, this plan has a certain type of name. Do you remember what type of name?
Oh, is it hold on. Is it axial or something?
Yeah,
like
yeah, exactly. Okay. It's an axial plan. That center line forms the axis around which this plan is built. Good. Here's another diagram turned on its side a little bit that shows that axis right through the middle. Great. Okay. What else do you see here? Just looking at this type of organization, what do you think is going on in this space? Gabby.
It looks like it's a place of worship because there's an altar.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Good. What else? If you imagine moving from this through this space, if you're walking up that second ramp, for example, you're going to see what?
It's highly symmetrical, so like you're kind of going to see similar things on each side as you walk up the center ramp, and then it kind of deviates slightly as you get further away from the center.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So you're going to move through this very symmetrical series of columns into an upper court or kind of an open plaza there. And then all of this is moving you toward which part of the plan? Let's see, Brad, any ideas on it?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It looks like it kind of moves you to like the upper court and maybe like towards that rock wall at the top.
Yeah.
Maybe there's like some significance behind that.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So the way that mortuary temples are usually set up is you have a series of sort of open public spaces. There would be guards in these open public spaces, and those guards might be temple priests. Sometimes those roles would be one and the same. And the progression of sort of holiness as you move through these temples, because of course the pharaohs were worshipped as sun gods or sun goddesses in Hatshepsut's case, you're moving toward the burial temple, which is here at the back of the plan. This is where she would have been buried. And at that point, as you can see here, we are back into the stone, back into the rock of the cliffs of the temple. Let me move up on that a bit. I would love for you to go back and watch this video, but we don't have time for it today, which is really unfortunate because it's great about what happened to Hatshepsut's legacy. She's been largely unknown until the very recent past because her nephew did destroy all of her images, or at least as many as he could. So here we're looking at the temple from an aerial view, and you can see that a lot of this is outside. A lot of it is not technically chthonic. It is carved from the hillside, so in that carving, it's not as if material was added. Material was removed to create that, so that part is still chthonic, just you don't see it immediately. But that temple structure, that place of burial, is back inside this hill. What's the metaphorical significance of that? Does it bring anything to mind for you?
I feel like it's kind of similar to what we were talking about with the pyramids and other temples where the person of the highest stature, the godlike figure, is buried within the earth, but then also like higher elevated than other things.
Yeah, excellent. So in this case, we have that metaphorical mountain becomes the real and actual mountain. And Hatshepsut is making a very strong statement in this. She is not being buried in a man-made temple. She's being buried in this huge mountainous structure constructed by the other gods before her, right? This is a real claim of authority and historicity and significance simply by the way that she has arranged her mortuary temple. Again, as we pointed out, it's important to keep in mind that the shift was almost necessary because there wasn't enough stone to be quarried to build up the pyramids, but it also marks a shift in mentality away from what we had seen in the Old Kingdom toward this new way of, celebrating the god or goddess who's buried there. Just a couple more views on this. And you can see this entire mountain where she is buried. It's monumental, it's huge. This is a lot of what you would have seen inside Hatshepsut's temple. It isn't as if it was just, simple stone cuts and nothing was done to the surfaces. It's highly decorated. The place where we think of and see all the hieroglyphs that we associate with Egyptian culture, they were largely inside these burial tombs, whether that was in the pyramids or inside these chthonic structures. So what we get to kind of theoretically with chthonic architecture, different from tectonic architecture, is this shift toward thinking of the earth as mother and an association, a feminine association with chthonic architecture. It is the birthplace of humanity. It is the place from which the gods and goddesses arise. There's a shift in terms of thinking about what the earth is and what culture is. Another thing associated with chthonic architecture is, of course, earth is death. We see burials happening in the ground from the time of the mastabas up until and beyond Hatshepsut, even into the present day. Some cultures continue to bury their dead in the earth. All these associations are tied to chthonic architecture. There's also the idea of the earth as refuge, and we see this right up into the present day. These were different plans during the 1940s, 50s, 60s. The more fear that came about in terms of nuclear fallout, the more elaborate elite homes became in order to have both a tectonic and a chthonic structure. And you see this over here on the right, in planning for the year 2000, when people were afraid that because the numbers on the computer couldn't turn over, that everything in the world was going to stop. It also was aligned with ideas about the end of the world in the Mayan calendar. People started making plans to dig themselves underground in case things went AWOL. I'm going to share this video with you too. This is just crazy. This is in Australia. It's a contemporary society that has chosen to live underground for ecological reasons. It's fascinating. So I'll post that separately. Chthonic architecture also draws on that idea of the earth as a place of refuge, of quiet, cool, safe contemplation. And that idea of the earth as an infinite mass. This is part of what Hatshepsut is playing on, right? She's becoming one with this infinite mass. There's also just the haptic or the bodily experience that is different in chthonic architecture, walking into a cave rather than walking into a home. Those things come along with this type of building, type of carving, type of burrowing. Okay, where am I on time? So this project, Abu Simbel, has anyone ever heard or read about what happened here? Okay, so what we're looking at is a modern day reconstruction of an original site from 1300 BCE in Egypt. So can anyone tell me what's going on here, if you look very carefully?
Is the original version like underwater
Yeah,
or
it's
underground?
it's underwater. Do you see it down here in this bottom corner? Down here? It's just the craziest thing. So when the city of Cairo reached a certain capacity, the government of Egypt and of Cairo realized that there wasn't enough water for the people. They needed to get more water pumped into the city for daily use. To do that, they decided to build a huge dam that would create hydroelectric power. It would also enable the city to control its flow of water. It just so happened that the dam and the water reservoir they wanted to build would totally engulf Abu Simbel. And the Egyptians have so many sites of incredible Egyptian history, architecture, and culture that some parts of the population were like, yeah, fine, we've got 1 million of those, just sink that one, it's okay. But the international community and many within Egypt themselves all went nuts and said, no, there's no way you can cover over this incredible historic site. That's not all right. It's not going to be possible. So large groups with large amounts of funding allied and made the decision that they would take and make a replica of Abu Simbel up above ground once the reservoir had been filled. So what we're looking at today is a replication. Even all of these parts that show where it had been bombed out and defaced, they replicated that material as carefully and closely as they could. So what are we seeing here? Someone just described like generally what you're looking at. Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Ellen.
It looks to be like 4 pharaohs or just people in power, maybe gods, sitting up high on thrones.
Yeah, exactly. We have 4 identical bodies, or would have been identical bodies before some destruction, of Ramses II, who was the king of Egypt, both the upper and lower divisions. So he's got an especially high sort of headdress crown here because he's representing his dominion over the upper and lower parts of Egypt. The chthonic sensibility that comes out here is so strong. So what does it mean? What does it mean that Ramses' body is right here where it is, doing what it's doing?
I think it gives a lot of power and a lot of beauty to the entrance of whatever temple or place it is.
Yeah, absolutely. This is his mortuary temple, so absolutely power and beauty there. Good. What's the association with the rock? If we think back to Hatshepsut and what that meant for her to be buried in there.
His body is basically being like created out of the earth itself or out of the stone itself. So that gives the like same godlike feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And here just monumentally, we'll move forward to pictures where you see the human scale compared to these large bodies. Ramses is declaring himself, as massive, as magnificent, and as deeply tied to the stone out of which these statues are made and the entire mountain that was behind him. That mountain has been diminished, of course, because the replication of the site is much smaller than it originally was. Okay, what type of plan are we looking at here?
Axial?
Yeah, it's an axial plan, right? Because you can see, okay, it's not perfectly symmetrical, but if you folded these 2 things, the top down on the bottom, you could see how it would run along an axis. Good. So again, a series of specialized rooms that would have held different treasure. There's some incredible sculpture and statuary inside that is also doubling as a column. You'll see that in just a second. And then back here at this very back side, this is where Ramses would have been buried. Here you can see a section of what that temple would look like and just how absolutely massive those front carvings are. These are the inner columns inside. Again, this is Ramses replicated over and over again and doing the structural work of a column, holding up the mountain itself, you know, both metaphorically and somewhat structurally. Again, we have these incredible hieroglyphs going through. And just down the road, there, Ramses also had a temple, a mortuary temple built for his wife Nefertiti. An unusual move. We don't see very many times where the wife gets her own temple. Here you can see the tiny little person here, and this is at Nefertiti's temple. And Nefertiti's temple is maybe half as large. Okay, last minute. We have the Ajanta caves of India. These are spectacular sites that again change the way we think about architecture. Here there's just this mystery added, this layer of a natural scene, which suddenly as you get closer and closer, you realize it's space for human dwelling. It's not obvious from the beginning unless you have an eye to see it or you've been there many times. It really reconfigures the human relationship with the surface of the earth. We are, in this case, the people who lived here or who continue to live here are cave dwellers. And we think about that as something ancient, you know, it's just another way. There are some spectacular examples in Turkey as well, where people continue to live in the rock, in the sides of the rock. Okay, I will share all of these videos with you. Any questions about Chthonic architecture? Okay, I will post a video for tomorrow, and then your exam will be on Friday. Again, just let me know if you want to have office hours, and thanks for the discussion today.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hello, hello.